As we delve into the 2020s, we are entering the Climate Endgame. What that means is unclear, which is precisely why it's so dangerous. We know climate change is bad and that it will inevitably cause a lot of problems. It already is causing problems, big ones. But just because we don't know exactly how bad it's going to be doesn't mean we can move slowly. In fact, as it turns out, it's quite the opposite. You keep hearing these hopeful stories about how we're shifting away from fossil fuels and renewable energy is on the rise, but global carbon emissions are still increasing, and that's the opposite of what we need to be doing. And we've known that for a while. So, how did we get here? The first World Climate Conference was in 1979. Yes, we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of the first time the entire world got together and said, "This is an issue. We have to do something about it." The dozens of experts involved put out a declaration to all nations. It had 3 key points. A. To take full advantage of humanity's present knowledge of climate. B. To take steps to improve significantly that knowledge. And C. To foresee and prevent potential man-made changes in climate that might be adverse to the well-being of humanity. Essentially saying that we should act on what we already know, but also learn more. That we should secure humanity's future. So, again, how the f*** did we get here? Well, as environmental issues go, climate change posed a uniquely difficult challenge to activists in the 1980s. The model for environmentalism at the time was more about rallying behind specific, observable issues, like smog over Los Angeles or the Love Canal chemical dump site. The threat of climate change, on the other hand, while known as a scientifically certain looming catastrophe, was not immediately observable. And of course, as soon as the oil industry realized the threat they were under, they made moves to secure their power. All they had to do was pay a few climate scientists to say that the science was uncertain, and that gave them something to fight back with politically. All of a sudden, an issue that had one side had 2 sides. That eventually snowballed into the climate denialism that we see today. Yeah, climate denialism didn't exist at first, it was created, on purpose. It's actually stronger now, even though individuals are being exposed to climate change directly. Heat waves are worse than ever. Droughts, floods, snowstorms. We're hitting that point in the movie Don't Look Up, where you can actually see the comet without a telescope. So, how much danger are we in exactly? Well, we don't know. But it's not between things are fine and things aren't fine. It's anywhere from we're in a lot of trouble to we're screwed. Let's take an example. So the way we've been measuring the warming climate is the average global temperature anomaly in degrees Celsius. 0 degrees is where we were before the Industrial Revolution. The major benchmarks that get talked about are 2 degrees, which will mark severe hardship, and 4 degrees, which will mean, well, everyone's screwed. As of now, 2023, we're sitting a little above 1.2, and it didn't really take that long for us to get here. Half of that happened in about the last 30 years. Following that pattern, we should have about 40 more years before things start to get really bad. Right? See, things are already pretty bad. Worse than we thought. Apparently, we were doing a little bit of geoengineering for a while. By accident. One of our pollutants was actually cooling the planet. Container ships traversing the Atlantic Ocean would use fuels that emitted, among other things, sulfur dioxide. Sulfur dioxide is a harmful pollutant. In fact, it's the main contributor to acid rain. In 2020, the UN said, "Hey, acid rain is bad. Let's stop that stuff." And then they did. But there was an unintended consequence. Sulfur dioxide reacts with oxygen and water to form sulfuric acid, creating aerosol particles that can seed clouds. The sulfur dioxide pumped into the air by container ships helped seed a lot of cloud cover over parts of the Atlantic Ocean. Those clouds reflected a lot of sunlight and decreased the amount of energy that reached the Earth's surface. Removing the sulfur dioxide decreased cloud cover. And that is why we've suddenly seen a spike in Atlantic Ocean temperatures. This, of course, worsened the warming effect. But there are other more direct issues caused by this. The current state of the climate we're familiar with is upheld by some key players. One of them is the AMOC, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation. This is one of the many parts of the global thermohaline circulation in the ocean. Long story short, it's the reason Europe is warmer than other regions at the same latitude. The AMOC is not a given. It actually depends a lot on specific conditions of temperature and salinity. Here's the thing. The rising global temperature is causing Arctic ice to melt. This adds fresh water to the ocean. If the AMOC experiences enough of a decrease in salinity, it could stop circulating entirely. Not only would this completely upend our climate system, but it would also decrease the ocean's capacity to pull carbon from the atmosphere. With the current no longer carrying new water upwards, the surface would become saturated with carbon. This would in itself further the climate crisis. And the AMOC is only one potential tipping point, as they're called. The fact is, the climate system is so complicated that we could literally be on the verge of a tipping point we don't know about until it's too late. But what if it's fine? Maybe the AMOC, through some miracle, regains its strength and persists. What kind of issues do we face then? What people don't seem to fully realize is that the primary threat climate change poses isn't an individual one. It's an agricultural one. As the climate system gets thrown deeper into chaos by the warming temperatures, it will become harder to farm enough food to feed the still growing global population. And once enough people are starving, the entire economy won't have enough labor to sustain itself. And that will result in industrial collapse. Some scientists actually did the math for corn, since it's the second most farmed crop in the world after sugarcane. It sustains a huge portion of our food supply. Corn has an optimum growth temperature of about 85 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit. As you approach this temperature from below, which we've been doing, average yields slowly increase. But what happens when you go beyond that? A gradual decrease? No. Corn yield drops off rapidly as temperatures increase past optimal levels. This means that as average temperatures rise, the yield from year to year will start varying. A lot. And this math doesn't even include variations in precipitation. Some have found that accounting for evaporation and soil moisture directly tends to provide more accurate projections of crop yields. Not to mention flooding, which on its own is expected to decrease yields from some crops as much as 4% in the next 10 years. On our current course, we can expect total industrial failure by 2040, probably? It's hard to tell, but it's probably better to err on the side of caution. Famines, food riots, and various other supply failures are inevitable, if we don't change what we're doing. And even the richest people can't escape those consequences. A total collapse of civilization will literally cause money itself to lose meaning. There would be no one to produce or transport anything that the rich and powerful consume. The complex economic web of redundancies in production and consumption would cease to function. The oil executives and powerful politicians are sealing their own fates. Ordinary climate activism clearly isn't working. Trying to fight the behemoth propaganda money machine doesn't work. We have to budge the individuals who actually hold the power. Show them how much trouble that they themselves are in. We can't appeal to their morals, but we can absolutely count on their own selfish desires. And you might be wondering, what about climate deniers? Aren't they a huge problem? I mean, yes and no, because they're just pawns. Immovable pawns manufactured by an incomprehensibly vast propaganda machine. There's no changing them, but they also don't really hold any individual power. They're there to make sure we can't vote our way through, and, well, they've accomplished that. But anyone with enough power to matter on an individual level definitely knows we are altering the climate. We just have to make sure they also know what it means for their future. And yes, reducing emissions significantly and rapidly worldwide will be hard. Fossil fuels are involved in the production pipeline of basically every single thing, everywhere. It'll be a lot of work. We might even have to give some stuff up, but it's better than giving up everything in the next 2 decades. And another thing to remember is that the USA isn't the only country. There are other countries whose entire economies, like Saudi Arabia, are propped up on oil. And we have to work with China. They're a huge source of emissions, more than any other country, but the USA actually still emits more carbon dioxide per person than China. By a lot, about 85% more. There's a lot of work to be done, and we can't wait any longer to really do it. I don't want to see the end of civilization. But hey, I might. Unless we do something.